Welcome to Survivor Scale, where we rank the characters in all your favorite horror movies. I'm Ace2Mass, and today I'm taking a look at every character in one of my favorite films, John Carpenter's 1982 sci-fi horror classic, The Thing. However, instead of ranking them based on their writing or how much I like them, I'm going to grade these characters in terms of their survivability, by how well I think they perform in various horror situations. For example, how well would MacReady fare in A Nightmare on Elm Street, or Palmer in Friday the 13th, or Childs in The Shining?
Come on, get me out of here!
Keep in mind though that this scale captures their overall aptitude, not just how well they performed in this film. I value things that are useful in nearly every situation over things that are specific to any particular movie or setting. So things like adaptability, awareness, and caution tend to hold more value to me than knowledge in a particular field or skills with a particular weapon. With all that said, let's get started. Beginning with the first victim, or at least the first one we see, we have Bennings. Now, in a film as mysterious and uncertain as The Thing, where knowledge is power, being the first victim makes it even more difficult to assess your viability in perilous situations because you have such little room for error. You have even less information and are therefore more prone to making mistakes. Oftentimes, you can act completely optimally and still lose because you didn't know the danger you were in, the specific abilities or weaknesses of whatever you were facing. So, admittedly, Bennings is at a disadvantage here, and in many ways simply got unlucky to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, something that could have also happened to several other characters. However, he wasn't completely doomed to die, and if he had taken more initiative after discovering that a literal alien had recently been thawed out and likely coincided with the destruction of a nearby camp, he may have fared far better. For example, even after learning that it can assimilate dogs, he didn't want to burn the thing, likely believing it to be of no danger, and tried to hold on to it for a Nobel Prize.
We ought to just burn these things.
Can't burn the find of the century. That's going to win somebody the Nobel Prize.
He let his guard down too early, illustrating to me that he may often get caught off guard or may risk his safety for the possibility of future success or fortune. On the bright side though, he shows at least some awareness and practical thinking when he questions why the Norwegians were shooting at a dog.
What were they doing flying that low? Shooting at a dog. At us.
And Gary seems quite shaken up to learn that Bennings has been killed, showing that Bennings may have the ability to make strong connections with those around him, a valuable trait when facing threats that require multiple people to fight.
MacReady, I know Bennings. I've known him for 10 years. He's my friend.
With all that said, Bennings falls into C tier. While his negatives aren't overwhelming, he has only a few real positives, and they aren't significant enough to put him much higher than average. Blair is an interesting case. There's so much to say about him. He has some outstanding strengths, but also some extreme weaknesses. Early on, his intelligence and initiative enable him to deduct the true nature of the Thing. He was the first to realize that the Thing tried to imitate the other dogs.
We got to it before it had time to finish.
Finish what?
Finish imitating these dogs.
And even understood the potential consequences of such an idea on the world at large. As a result, he killed the remaining Huskies and subsequently recognized and acted upon the danger of the crew around him, his skepticism making him distrustful of everyone else. All of this shows his ability to uncover important information when it is most critical. However, he should have been more cautious once he realized the potential danger of the Thing. He made the wrong moves despite having valuable information. He suspected Clark, but still isolated himself with him, which likely would have resulted in his death had he been correct.
Are you saying to me the dog wasn't put in the kennel until last night?
Right.
How long were you alone with that dog?
He also decided to destroy the communication and tried to attack the other crew members to stop the Thing.
Most of you don't know what's going on around here. Hold on, damn well.
This was far too extreme, causing his own allies to turn against him, even after he'd proven his usefulness, showing just how harmful his actions were. Additionally, he never considered a way to test who had been assimilated, instead opting to destroy any way off the continent. When confronted during his tirade, he shoots at Childs,
I'll kill you.
but misses and wastes the remaining bullets, showing how his emotions can negatively affect his judgment. I think Blair can be a valuable asset in several situations with his medical knowledge and ability to figure out how things work, even if that may have been specific to this situation. However, his secretiveness can make the information he uncovers obsolete, and the actions he takes in response to said information may create tensions between his allies and himself, making it even more difficult to take the right actions. With all that said, I'm giving him B tier. Next, we have Childs, one of the trickier characters to rank. Throughout the film, Childs is stubborn, assertive, and antagonistic.
Then kill me.
Clearly making his feelings known to those around him, even when it may hurt his position.
I just cannot believe any of this voodoo bullshit.
He conflicts with MacReady several times, even when MacReady has all the power.
And Clark was human, huh? Which makes you a murderer, don't it?
In many other situations, perhaps when he's not familiar with whomever or whatever has seized power, he may fare far worse. Additionally, though he does eventually burn it, Childs initially hesitates when he first sees the thing in the kennel and nearly dies as a result, making me question how well he'd respond in other high-pressure situations.
Burn it! Damn it, Childs, torch it!
Perhaps most alarming though, when it comes to Childs, is the group's abrupt reaction to his proposal to be in charge. Clark even pulls a knife on him.
I'll take him.
Like hell you will.
There should be somebody a little more even-tempered, Childs.
Such extreme defensiveness to Childs here suggests some deep distrust of him from the group. When the people you work with feel so adamantly against you being in charge, there's likely some problematic experiences or perceived character traits that caused it, making me uneasy about his chances in a setting that requires cooperation or his ability to convince other people to take a course of action. Morally, Childs was comfortable killing MacReady even though MacReady may have still been human.
Childs! What if we're wrong about him? Why then we're wrong?
Sometimes sacrificing others is the safest course of action, and Childs' willingness to do so bodes well for his chances of survival in other situations. All in all, I'm less sure of where to rank Childs as opposed to the previous crew members. However, due to his positive and negative attributes weighing fairly evenly, I'll cautiously place him in C tier.
It's a crock of shit.
Moving on, we have Clark, lover of dogs. Despite his rugged exterior, Clark may be the most emotional member of the crew, seen in how he cares for the Huskies. He shows a great affection for them when everyone else seems to dismiss them.
Clark, will you put this mutt with the others where he belongs?
Being comfortable around or having knowledge about animals can be valuable in situations where they're around, but such situations are rare. So it's a positive, but not a huge one. When he sees the thing in the kennel, he reacts quickly and has a frame of mind to lock it inside, suggesting that he performs well under pressure, a valuable trait in situations like these. However, he meets his death when he tries to sneak up on MacReady with a scalpel. Whether you think this was brave or stupid, it was undoubtedly risky. From his perspective though, he must have thought that MacReady had become too untrustworthy and decided that he needed to kill him. At this point, he probably thought that MacReady was still human since he tried to use a small blade to kill him, something that he should know would be ineffective against the thing. If he somehow thought that MacReady were a thing at this point, his intelligence and awareness would take a huge hit, but I highly doubt that that's the case. It can be argued though that Clark held some resentment towards MacReady after he killed one of his dogs in the kennel, making him want to kill him. If this is true, then his emotions may negatively influence his judgment and could lead him to doing things that drastically lower his chances of survival. Overall, his willingness to take risks will likely prove useful more often than it did in this film, but I don't trust him to know what risks should be avoided and which ones are worth taking, so I'd expect a similar performance in other situations as well, especially when these risks don't pay off. For those reasons, I'm also placing him in C tier. We may not always like them, but pretty much everyone could use a doctor from time to time, especially one as clever as Copper.
Oh, come on. 4 stitches, barely grazed you.
His medical knowledge alone has value, giving him priority and influence over many others in similar situations. After the Norwegians arrive and cause chaos, making explosions and shooting Bennings, Copper makes an effort to find out what happened at their camp, recognizing that something very strange had just occurred and that more information should be gathered rather than simply leaving it be.
Guys as crazy as that could have done a lot of damage to their own before they got to us.
Nothing we can do about that.
Oh, yes, there is. I want to go up.
Additionally, though we don't see whether it would actually work, he also figured out a way to test for the thing, mixing unknown blood with previously identified uncontaminated blood.
I've been thinking about a blood serum test. Could take a sample of each person's blood, could mix it with uncontaminated blood. I suppose if there's a reaction, we'd know who isn't human.
He brings this idea up a bit late though, only mentioning it after being asked about a possible test, despite having already thought of it, perhaps demonstrating his perfectionism or lack of confidence, not wanting to suggest an idea if he wasn't sure it would work. As an influential figure, it's important to recognize that others will often listen to you, so you should be careful when suggesting any idea. But you should also recognize the importance of the right move. So knowing when to refine an idea and when to speak about it is very important, but difficult to do. From what I've seen of Copper though, I think he's well suited for such a role, even if he waited too long in this particular instance. Now, like most of the other characters, he does die, but he's even less at fault for his death than pretty much anyone else. He couldn't have reasonably been expected to know or even been prepared for the thing to be capable of splitting its chest open, pulling his hands inside, growing teeth, and biting his arms off.
Clear.
It would have taken some pretty major leaps to expect something so extreme, so his failure to see this outcome doesn't really make me negatively view his survival chances in other scenarios. Overall, Copper has many strengths. His medical knowledge will make people want to protect him and give him influence. He seems capable of reasoning with people well,
Mac, I'm not a prisoner!
which alongside his intelligence and forethought makes him well equipped for high performance in other contexts. However, one issue I have with Copper is he feels too reliant on other people. Many of his skills are valuable because they work with others and can give him influence, but in situations where people are more scarce or separated, I think he falls off quite a bit. Fortunately for Copper though, these situations are pretty uncommon and don't hurt his overall value that much, so I'm still giving him A tier. Fuchs may seem like just an ineffective role player, but he nearly maxes out in several categories. He has a sense of caution and preparation that would allow him to survive the early portions of many horror situations. He thinks outside the box and considers possibilities that many others overlook. He suggested that everyone should prepare their own meals and eat out of cans after recognizing the possibility that even a small particle could overtake an entire organism.
If a small particle of this thing is enough to take over an entire organism, then everyone should prepare their own meals, and I suggest we only eat out of cans.
Whether or not this is true, such a healthy dose of paranoia would likely allow him to evade seemingly insignificant threats that are actually deadly. He kept his guard up even after everyone but Blair had let theirs down. Additionally, while this may not help his chances of survival directly, if this is true, as is suggested by MacReady in the film,
Maybe he burned himself before it could get to him.
his willingness to sacrifice himself to prevent threats from having an advantage over his companions bodes well for his team's success, and if they recognize this trait, may even make them more willing to protect him. Despite these strong positives though, he does have some limitations. He doesn't seem to garner much pull from the others, having little influence on the direction of the group. Sometimes it's important to be able to convince or even force others to take a particular course of action, especially when you have important information or when they are taking an incorrect path. However, he repeatedly confides in MacReady, the most influential character in the film, suggesting that Fuchs may understand his own lack of authority, causing him to influence those who have influence, thereby giving him power indirectly so his intelligence and caution can be more effective. In other horror scenarios where he has little to no influence, I think he could do as he does with MacReady and work privately with whomever has the most influence. That said, he also isolated himself despite knowing that the thing would have more effectiveness when he's alone, a mistake that ultimately led to his death.
Who's that?
Now, I'm not confident that this mistake wasn't based in his personality rather than something specific to this situation, meaning he may also isolate himself in other horror scenarios even when it's against his best interests, lowering his chances of survival. All in all though, I'm placing him in A tier. Like Copper, his cautiousness and intelligence will take him far in most situations, even if he may not seem very useful at first glance. Gary is the funniest character in the film. Constantly drawing the short end of the stick, he repeatedly finds himself scrambling to clear his name. Unfortunately for Gary though, he is not the greatest at the art of persuasion.
I suppose somebody could have lifted it off me.
Oh, come on. That key ring of yours is always hooked to your belt.
He does, however, recognize when he's in a bad position. Not trying to force the group to cooperate, he hands over the gun to appease them after being accused of sabotaging the blood.
I guess you'll all feel a little easier if
somebody else was in charge.
Prior to that though, he took charge and was able to de-escalate the situation when Windows ran for the gun rack. Now, while he did so through the threat of violence,
I'll put this right through your head.
he demonstrated an ability to assert control without harming anyone or creating a negative perception of himself, a very valuable skill in situations with other people. Here, he shows an awareness and ability to control his emotions, something he hasn't completely perfected though.
I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch!
For Gary, guns are not just for show. While such a skill may not be useful in every situation, Gary seems to be very accurate with a gun, hitting the Norwegian in one shot from quite a distance. This level of dexterity can serve him well if given the opportunity, but I'm not confident that he's very dynamic with the weapon. He may have had good aim when he shot the Norwegian, but he wasn't under much stress and wasn't moving much. He had time to post up and aim cleanly, a fortune that will not always be afforded. Overall, Gary is competent and has some useful skills, but I just don't believe that he'd consistently do well in other horror situations. He doesn't display any impressive ingenuity or leadership, and the positive attributes he does have don't hold up as well in every or even most situations. He performed decently well in this film, but I think he'd rarely repeat this same level of success. With that said, I'm placing him in C tier. As one of the most highly regarded protagonists in horror movie history, MacReady influences much of the story's direction. Many of his actions change the dynamics within the group and reveal one of his most noteworthy and important qualities when it comes to his potential success in other horror movie conflicts. His ability to lead and, if need be, take control from others and maintain it. Early in the film, MacReady holds a level of respect over the rest of the group. When Knowles brings back MacReady's torn clothes, Windows seems astonished at the idea that MacReady could have lost, showing how highly some view him.
I cut him loose. MacReady? He's one of them. When do you think it got to him?
Even respected characters like Copper listen to what he says, not trying to force MacReady to fly to the Norwegian camp despite his strong desire to do so.
It's up to you, Mac. If you don't want to fly, we don't fly.
Interestingly, Palmer had previously volunteered to fly them, but Copper denied that request in favor of MacReady specifically, illustrating the skill and poise others see in MacReady even before the film really takes off.
He knows what he's doing.
To me, this suggests that MacReady likely would hold a similar feeling over people in other situations, even if he had not yet proven it with his actions, potentially allowing him to take the lead early on and hopefully preventing the group from making fewer mistakes through his leadership. MacReady has also shown great reactivity. He immediately sounded the alarm when he heard the dogs whining in the kennel, and quickly destroyed Bennings when he saw that he had been assimilated. He even managed to shoot Clark when he lunged at him with a scalpel.
Gotcha, bitch!
All of these moments demonstrate a skill that always has value, especially early on when he may not even realize he's in danger. Quick reactions and awareness can allow him to recognize threats and respond to them effectively even with little information. On the other hand, MacReady has also shown to be proactive and clever. When others suggested that they simply hole up and wait things out, MacReady fought back because he realized that this would likely make things much worse, putting them into a position where they would almost definitely lose.
Hole up till spring, wait for the rescue team.
No, we don't wait. Somebody in this camp ain't what he appears to be. Right now, that may be one or two of us. By spring, it could be all of us.
It's important to recognize when you have an advantage and when best to use it. In other situations, I think MacReady would also have the awareness to think ahead and not so willingly give his opponent time to recover. MacReady further displays his ingenuity and tenacity after being left in the cold by Knowles and subsequently locked out of the camp. Here, he realizes that the group likely thinks he's been assimilated and would therefore try to kill him on sight. In response, he ignites some dynamite to take control of the group.
Anyone messes with me and the whole camp goes.
Physically, he has the strength to fight off both Knowles and Norris without ever letting go of the dynamite, so his strength can probably be useful to him as well. Though Blair discovered the most useful piece of information, that the thing can imitate other life forms, including people, MacReady had the most innovative idea. Simply seeing how the thing's body worked, how it would separate itself when in danger, was enough for him to figure out how to tell who's human and who's a thing, something nobody else had done up to this point despite its importance. Unfortunately for MacReady though, he is by no means perfect and certainly made some mistakes.
Yeah, fuck you too!
While the blood test was an incredible idea, MacReady also made some pretty serious errors throughout it. Firstly, he shouldn't have tied all the crewmates together.
Tie everybody down real tight.
If one of them were to turn into a thing, something that does end up happening, it could have infected the others it was tied next to. And even if MacReady had managed to burn it before that, the flames could have easily spread. He likely could have avoided this potentially devastating outcome if he had simply restrained them separately. He also shouldn't have held the petri dishes in his hands while testing the blood. While he may not have expected it to have such an extreme reaction, he did say it would try and survive.
It'll try and survive. Crawl away from a hot needle, say.
So a bit more caution, even with something as small as this, wouldn't have hurt and could be the difference between life and death in some extreme examples. He also tells people to split up to look for Fuchs, initially having them go in pairs, with him and Knowles and Palmer and Windows partnering up.
Knowles, why don't you come with me and we'll look outside. Palmer, you and Windows check the inside.
This, however, is a terrible idea.
Cut the bullshit!
Because if any pairing does have an imitation, then the only person to fight it will be the person the thing is trying to assimilate. Ideally, you'd want as many people as possible to go against the thing, so you'd want to keep the groups as large as you can. To his credit though, after Palmer disputes this idea, which by the way was probably a mistake from the thing as well, MacReady has them go in groups of at least 3, which makes it less likely that the thing could successfully assimilate anyone without at least being seen by a third member. Unless of course there were 2 things in the group, which would pretty much screw over that third member and basically guarantee his assimilation, but that's very unlikely, so it's still the right move. At the end of the film, he once again has the other crewmates split up, telling Gary and Knowles to plant bombs in different locations, which indirectly leads to their deaths.
Gary, plant yours in the old storage room. Knowles down by the generator.
Now, I don't think the situation was urgent enough that they didn't have time to put the explosives in each of the locations while sticking together, so that they could watch each other's backs. If that were the case though, then MacReady probably should have mentioned it, and in that case, I probably would give him a little bit more credit. With a recurring mistake such as this, MacReady may actually overestimate the competency of those around him, which may be a reason he so often has them separate. If that is the case, it can be valuable for those he's working with by instilling them with confidence, but as we see in the film, it can also cause his plans to have poor execution, lowering their effectiveness. Also concerning, MacReady was a bit slow to urgency after learning about the thing. He simply wanted to get drunk instead of staying alert when Fuchs seemed desperate to talk to him and only took him seriously late in the conversation.
I have to talk to you. I'm tired of talking, Fuchs. I just want to get up to my shack and get drunk.
It didn't hurt him much here, but had Fuchs not been so adamant about talking with MacReady, something that says a lot about the respect he has for him by the way, then MacReady may have done exactly what he said he wanted to do in getting drunk. Fortunately though, he does ultimately recognize the severity of Fuchs's words and really gets going down the path that made him one of the most iconic horror movie characters ever. All in all, despite a few hiccups here and there, MacReady performs exceptionally well. I should say though that I feel like a lot of his success comes from people already respecting him. I'm not sure how well it would translate to another setting, particularly one where the others have had no prior interactions with MacReady. Unlike Hopper, his occupation likely won't garner a great deal of influence on its own, so he'll probably need to earn it through his actions. Despite that, out of all the characters so far, I'd have the most faith in him to survive through other films. His adaptability, reactiveness, and even physicality give him a great chance in pretty much any situation. It should be mentioned though that MacReady will risk his own life for the protection of humanity at large, as he does at the end of the film when he blows up the camp to kill the thing. Now, while this seems like a detriment to his own survival, I would say that this self-sacrifice wouldn't show up regularly and would likely only come into play when something as existentially threatening as the thing comes around, which isn't often. If he hadn't had to worry about that, I think he'd have performed even better. Basically, MacReady didn't even plan on surviving throughout the film, and he still did. That should tell you all you need to know. S tier. There's not that much to say about Knowles, either positive or negative. He acts as the comedic relief throughout much of the film.
No, why you disrespectful men been tossing his dirty drawers in the kitchen trash can.
And while this may be entertaining to us, it may also create unnecessary conflict with those around him, such as when Bennings angrily requests for him to lower the volume on his music.
Will you turn that crap down? I'm trying to get some sleep.
Only for Knowles to dismiss him entirely.
Will do.
on the wall.
Fortunately though, this happened before things really took off, so he can't be faulted for not taking things seriously, especially since these antics go away when the danger becomes too much to ignore. Knowles also may have been a bit too quick to distrust MacReady after finding his torn jacket, believing him to be a thing. However, it's much better to be safe in these moments than to take risks, and it was much safer to assume that MacReady had been assimilated than that he had not. Knowles recognized the potential danger of his situation and quickly escaped, giving me confidence in his awareness and willingness to seek safety, a trait that will likely raise his chances of survival in other situations. Now, we don't know exactly what happened to Knowles at the end of the film, but he seems to get distracted and kind of just strays away from everyone else, a poor decision that probably causes his death. Being so easily distracted and drawn away from what he believed was a safer area makes me very uneasy about him in these situations. He could have at least told MacReady that he was checking something out, but he simply walks away without a word, making it much less likely that he'd receive help if he needed it, which he ultimately did. Overall, I'll give Knowles C tier. He seems fairly average in his capabilities, not doing much to either help or harm his chances, but does possess the ability to recognize danger and will at least try to escape if given the opportunity, something all too rare in horror movies. A solid survivor. Norris can be a bit tricky to pin down. Since we don't know exactly when he gets assimilated, his assessment may be somewhat tainted, having a wider range of possibilities than most of the other characters, but let's give it a shot. Norris comes across as fairly intelligent. He seemed to have a good idea of how long ago the alien arrived on Earth simply by looking at the ice that surrounded the ship.
How long you figure this has been in the ice?
The backscatter effect's been bringing things up around here for a long time. I'd say the ice it's buried in is 100,000 years old, at least.
This kind of thing may not prove useful very often, but it does suggest a deeper intelligence that may be useful in those situations. I can't give him much credit for that though, since it's a bit of an assumption, but I thought I should at least mention it. Additionally, despite his subdued presence, Norris also seems to have strong leadership qualities as Gary nominates Norris to be in charge after Blair's meltdown.
Norris, I can't see anybody objecting to you.
This suggests an ability to build bonds, something he could use to influence those around him for his own gain. He doesn't accept Gary's proposal though.
I'm sorry, fellas, but I'm not up to it.
Which, if he hadn't been assimilated by this point, may be due to a lack of confidence in himself, a potentially harmful trait in these types of situations, especially when you have the awareness and intelligence to make the right decisions. So this could certainly hold him back. Like I said, we don't have much information with Norris, but what we do see suggests a fairly competent character with some upside. Unfortunately though, he doesn't seem to stand out in any particular way, at least with the little we see of him in the film. So I'm gonna put him in C tier. Here, we have another difficult character to assess. Though there are theories, like Norris, it's not entirely clear when Palmer gets assimilated, making his viability in survival situations a bit uncertain. What we do know though is how others view him.
I mean, look at Palmer. He's been the way he is since the first day.
Despite volunteering to fly Copper to the Norwegian camp, Copper chooses MacReady over Palmer, showing how much more poorly he views Palmer than MacReady.
Shit, Doc, I'll give you the lift. No problem.
Forget it, Palmer.
Hey, thanks for thinking about it, though.
Additionally, he's shown as aloof and unfocused, constantly blabbering about, well, whatever he blabbers about.
Chariots of the gods, man. They practically own South America. I mean, they taught the Incas everything they know.
Now, we don't know for sure when he gets assimilated, but it's possible that these qualities led to his death, which is just an example of how his lackadaisical nature can cause his own downfall. While I could see him as low as F tier, I don't think he actively harms his own position or makes overwhelming, clearly avoidable mistakes often enough to put him there. I think he'd generally be pretty passive, letting others make decisions for him, whether they are good or bad, and even if he had a desire to lead, he'd have a difficult time getting others to listen to him. With that said, I'm giving him D tier. Finally, we have Windows. I'll be honest, Windows has little going for him and ranks very low.
Hey, fuck you!
He doesn't have the respect of his crewmates, seen with their constant berating of him. And his fearfulness leads to poor decision making, like when he tries to get a gun even though he'd very likely have been unable to without being seen or before being stopped, which would likely make people respect him even less.
Windows!
He also froze up during the blood test when he had a clean shot on Palmer and while MacReady's flamethrower had stopped working, ultimately causing his own death. Such extreme hesitation in the face of imminent danger is one of the worst things a person can do. And nothing about this moment feels unique in a way that would make me feel confident that something similar wouldn't happen again if he were confronted by some other monster. He even dropped the keys when he saw Bennings being assimilated, leading to all sorts of confusion later on. Just another example of his unreliability and skittishness. I just can't see many scenarios where he survives the entire time. I feel like he'll always lack the respect of those around him, and for the most part doesn't make good decisions, especially under pressure. His best chance is to stick close to somebody with much more competence, something he showed some ability to do when he followed MacReady's orders during the blood test. Otherwise, I think he'll always have a very difficult time. With all that said, I'm giving Windows D tier as well, with the only thing keeping him from being F tier is that he doesn't totally sabotage himself. But actually, you know what? I'm putting him in F tier. He's that bad. So that's my breakdown of all the main characters in The Thing. Before I go though, I want to give out 2 awards. Well, 1 award and 1 whatever the opposite of an award is. First off, the Ultimate Survivor Award goes to the character most likely to survive a random horror movie. Now, this wasn't as simple as you might think. At first, I considered Copper because he doesn't really have any glaring flaws, though he is a bit older so he may have issues physically. His traits and skill set would likely work well in any scenario and allow him to start off strong. However, ultimately, I went with MacReady because while he seems to have more flaws shown in the film, most of them feel specific to this situation, or at least an uncommon occurrence. And MacReady also offers things at a higher level than Copper, especially individually, allowing him to be less reliant on those around him. For these reasons, MacReady is the ultimate survivor. On the opposite end of things, the First Kill award goes to the character least likely to survive a random horror movie, and I'm giving it to Windows. His main competition is Palmer, and he may somehow be worse, but we have far more concrete information with Windows, and it's not very promising, so I'm sticking with him. Windows is the First Kill. But that's it. The Thing is one of my favorite films, and it's still my favorite horror movie. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. Let me know what you want to see next.